Hi guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. So I want to finish our discussion, or at least continue it, on the topic of reality-based television shows and their effect on the greater antiques and collectibles trade. So if you do watch my video on Pawn Stars and my thoughts on that particular reality-based television show, I said that I would be doing American Pickers in another video. Well, that's going to be this video. I also want to do a video on Toy Hunter, but I think Toy Hunter is going to fit more in line with when I start talking about investment grade or collectible vintage toys and action figures. So I am going to hold off on doing that video until I start talking more about collectible toys. I think it just fits better in that realm because it is a reality-based television show, but it's also genre specific. So a lot of the talking points that I have for that particular video will make a good segue into talking about like vintage Star Wars figures, Transformers, G.I. Joe, all the toys where if you're a Gen Xer or a millennial, you probably know and or grew up with, okay? So in this particular video, we are going to go into my thoughts on American Pickers, and kind of the way I left my last video on Pawn Stars when I said that I'd be discussing this topic is, I said that American Pickers is one of the best and one of the worst shows in the greater antiques and collectibles trade geared towards reality television. It really is. My thoughts on American Pickers, and again, some of this is going to overlap with what I said about Pawn Stars, but it's going to be a little bit different too, because American Pickers and Pawn Stars are both in different markets, let's be honest. One set in a pawn shop, okay, a physical location, and then you have American Pickers that basically go out across the U.S. in a van, and they attempt to track down leads of valuable antiques and collectibles that they can purchase and flip for a profit. So their business, their core business is the same. It's taking something of value, paying less than market value for it, and turning a profit on it. Both Pawn Stars and American Pickers do the same thing. It's just how they go about doing it is completely different, okay? So we have to go back to 2010 again, because if it were not for the success of Pawn Stars, I really don't think that, at least on the History Channel side of things, they would have picked up the rights to distribute American Pickers. You know, I give a lot of respect to both Mike Wolf and Frank Fritz for bringing this aspect of a business that was relatively unknown 10, 20 years ago from today, and bringing it to the forefront. As I've said before in my other video, Mike Wolf had the idea to bring something like this to television for years before it came to fruition, okay? He approached the History Channel, and he kind of liked their vision of what he had in his head about how to bring the show to the masses, and they inked a deal. And every week when you turn on American Pickers, which is still going strong, you pretty much watch that vision come to life. Now, the greatest thing about American Pickers, okay, if you're going to watch American Pickers, you really need to go back and watch the first season. The first season of the American Pickers is some of the best reality-based television ever set in the antiques and collectibles marketplace. Now, why am I telling you that? Well, it's quite simple. Now that we're on, what, the 10th year that American Pickers is going strong, I think 2020 will be the 10th year because it came out in 2010. Everybody they pretty much approach out there in the greater United States of America already knows who they are and what they do. One of the things that's routinely edited out of the show, ironically, is like if they walk up and cold approach somebody on the street or somebody's house or somebody's barn or what have you. If the person says, hey, you're American Pickers, I watch you guys on the History Channel, or I know you guys from TV, I have it on good authority that that is edited out of the show because they have so much recognition that they don't have to overcome the initial hurdle that someone like you or me, where if we went out and we drove cross country in a van and tried to get people to sell us their items, well, they don't know us from John, Dick, or Harry, if you know what I mean. There's no rapport, there's no trust built. That's why I tell everybody to go back and watch the first season. You get to see their struggles. You get to see when they ride up on somebody with a camera crew, These people don't even know what the American Pickers is because they're still filming the first episodes that have yet to air on the History Channel. So there's a lot of frustration, a lot of rejection. They get guns pointed in their faces, which really isn't shown on any of the television episodes, but it is alluded to. If you listen to some of the behind-the-scenes action with Mike and Frank, okay? Very scary stories from some of the predicaments that they were placed into. That said, I really think the first, second, and third seasons really capture the essence and the frustration and the disappointments of going out, trying to make a living by walking up on people's property and or getting leads for people who collect things like vintage advertising, vintage Harley and Indian motorcycle parts, items of that nature where it takes a set type of person to pursue those items. I've said this before, a collector is not made. As much as everybody wants to believe that you can convince your son or daughter to become a collector, or your neighbor, or your friend, or whoever it is. Collectors are born. It's a mindset you're born with. Most collectors, I've said this before, if they are successful in collecting, it is because they are also very well-tuned or well-educated or well-versed in economics and finance. There is a crossover effect there. That's why when you guys watch my video on antiques and collectibles as a valid alternative asset class, I have to bring up Wall Street. I have to bring up comparative financial assets in regards to talking about antiques and collectibles, because antiques and collectibles, all they really are is a commodity. If you invest in gold, silver, oil, cryptocurrency, you can substitute that with any top tier antique or collectible. Gold and silver sitting in a bank safety deposit box is not going to pay you an interest or a dividend payment every month or 3 months. Now, if you own stock in a gold mining company or a silver mining company, you will most likely get a small dividend or a small interest payment, something along those lines, every 3 months, every 6 months, however they pay out a dividend. That said, if you own a valuable antique, okay, and you put it on the shelf, it's not going to pay you a dividend either. It's an alternate asset, and some assets are better investments than others. Always remember this, the difference between a rich man and a poor man, okay? I'm going to teach you something in finance that really helped me when I first heard this, okay, 20-some years ago, and it kind of changed my life for the better. The difference between a rich man and a poor man, on average, isn't the money they make. It's what they do with that money and what they buy with that money. Poor people, and even middle-class people, buy a lot of things that they consider to be assets that really are liabilities, okay? Rich, wealthier people, and even people on the upper cusp of the middle class strata, where I would probably place myself, okay? Those people buy assets that truly are assets. They understand what goes into the markets of the assets they're buying, and they can sit there and factor in how this fits into their whole life and or investment portfolio, okay? If you're going to spend $5,000 on a coin or a piece of currency or a Tiffany vase or a graded video game, okay, you better be right about two things. Number one, you better be sure that you don't need that $5,000 anytime soon. Because to invest in something like that, you have to have a minimum, on average, of 5 years, okay, time frame. Number two, you also better be sure that you're able to analyze the greater market and know, or at least have confidence, that in 5 years down the line, or 10 years, or 20 years, whatever it is, that item's going to be at least worth what you paid for it, and there's not a major downturn or catalyst coming into the market, I use that term a lot, that changes things, where that $5,000 item is now only worth $1,000 or $2,000, because that can very well happen. That's why one thing that I like about American Pickers is, on a lot of the earlier seasons, you hear them talk about turning inventory. This is something that I wish Pawn Stars would focus in on, okay? If you're buying solely for flipping an item, okay, or even for investment, and you're tying up large amounts of money, the quickest way to go bankrupt, I don't care if you have a retail store, I don't care if you're just a collector who wants to get in investing in antiques and collectibles, and you stupidly put all of your money in antiques and collectibles and don't invest in anything else and have no outside cash source where if something happens and you need to get cash, you don't have to rely on selling those assets or items that you have money tied up into at a potential loss. One thing that American Pickers does right, you will hear them talk about, we have to turn our inventory. We have to turn our inventory. What that means is, if they're going out and they're spending $5,000 to drive across the country, and let's say they're out a week or 2 weeks, and they spend $10,000 on top of that to buy items. I'm using small numbers just so everybody can follow along, that's why. So they have $15,000 invested. And let's say that $10,000 plus the $5,000 that they spent on gas, food, lodging, whatever, okay? They bought items that they know they can flip for $30,000. Well, if all that money is tied up in items where it takes them 2 years or 3 years to flip it all, guess what? They're in trouble. They're going to eventually hit a cash crunch where all their money is locked up in inventory to the point that they have no free cash to go out and buy more items. That's why it's very important when you start getting into the antiques and collectibles business, where you're doing it like I was on eBay full time back in the 90s and early 2000s. You really have to understand what you're buying, the price you're paying, and what you're flipping that for, and how quick it can be sold. I used to go after stuff that I could flip in a weekend, meaning I would put it on eBay with a buy it now, and I would hope it would sell immediately within 3 to 5 days, so I could flip that money and keep turning it over. That's what you have to pay attention to, all right? And there's business terms for that as well. Inventory ratio, cost of sales, cost of goods sold compared to inventory turnover. Okay, I can go into further detail on that. I'm not going to because it's going to bore you all. But that's something that this show does right, and I respect them for it. The problem is, now that the show's going on for 10 years, and everybody's already a multi-millionaire pretty much on the show, because, I mean, this show's very successful, okay? I can tell you this right now, and I'm going to get into that in this video. I live in Boyertown, Pennsylvania. Mike and Frank picked Zimmers, who also lives in Boyertown, Pennsylvania. I live a mile from the place that they picked his residence and his, I think it was his business, Zimmer's Pets. That whole storefront is located less than a mile from my house, okay? They pulled out of there an Amazing Fantasy 15 comic book and also a Hulk 1. If you guys want to look up the episode, just Google Boyertown, B-O-W-E-R-T-O-W-N, American Pickers, and you should get the gamut of articles that came from Google on this particular topic, okay, if that interests you. That said, they do a good job, at least in the earlier episodes, of showing that. It's the later episodes where it kind of drops off. I got a little bit kind of, how do I want to say this, discouraged with some of the stuff they're going after now in the later episodes. You can kind of tell that if they were still struggling like they were in the first 1 or 2 or 3 seasons of American Pickers, they would not have the funds to tie up that much money on some of the projects that they're going after now. Like, I know it's both good and bad when you see it, but I get a little bit, how do I want to say this, discouraged when I see them going out there and offering like $40,000, $50,000 for one item. The average person who is trying to engage in that type of transaction, meaning they're going out, they're hitting the streets of America, okay? They're literally driving cross-country to follow up on leads and seek out collections. They can't afford to tie up $50,000 in one item, guys, okay? And that's something that people don't understand. I have a video that I'm going to be showing about how the high end of the top tier, I'm talking the top 1 to 4% of the antiques trade works. And some of you guys are going to be blown away, because I know dealers, I personally know dealers who are in the top tier. I'm talking they are top tier dealers in the antiques realm, and you know they sell less than 10 items a year. Do you know why? They go after the most hardest and rarest items in the trade, to the point where there's only a handful of items. Remember, I did a video on this. The problem that I have with collectibles, in a sense, is everybody calls something like stadium events, which was pretty much mass-produced for the original Nintendo system, rare. It is not rare. It may be rare by the standards we're judging in regards to video games. For instance, compared to Snow Brothers, which is an uncommon game, stadium events is rare. Snow Brothers had a larger production run, obviously. That said, when you get to the antiques market, rare actually means something. It means generally less than 25 known examples exist. And honestly, you'll have antique dealers out there, they won't call something rare unless if less than 10 known examples exist. That's something that you guys have to keep in mind, because that's a vast difference from going from higher-end antiques to high-end collectibles. I mean, how many copies of stadium events are out there? There's several thousand to my knowledge. I told you guys in another video, I had 10 copies at one point. I forget how many I sold such and such a time. I would have to check my records. In the video I talk about that, I had my records in front of me. Okay, so you guys can go back and keep me honest. That said, it's not a rare game. It's just, like I said, it's considered iconic from people who seem to collect and value the Nintendo Entertainment System. But I'm going to be very honest, with the rise of digital video games and the like, a limited run game like this Toe Jam Earl game that came out for the Nintendo Switch, you can't compare something like this to stadium events, because this had it just as a small print run, possibly, okay? This is a mass-produced item based off a digital download that you don't even need this, okay? You can go and download the game. You can't download stadium events. It's kind of a flash-in-the-pan, once-and-done, iconic collectible that hit the scene and has cult status thanks to a lot of people my age that are going out and having a passion for the original Nintendo system, wanting to collect for it, and they need something to consider a holy grail. So it just so happened that stadium events fit the bill, and it caught on. But really, there's nothing historic about it. I would not be paying $13,000, $15,000, $20,000 for a graded copy of stadium events in today's marketplace. It's ridiculous. Now, I may be wrong, okay? It doesn't matter what I think or any collectibles expert thinks. It matters what the trend does over the long period of time. So if enough people come into the market over the next 20 years and they all value stadium events, well, obviously the price is going to go up. If enough people leave the market, want to sell their stadium events, and younger collectors are sitting there scratching their heads going, why the heck am I going to give you $15,000 for this horrible game? The price is going to fall. That's basic economics. That said, my opinion is I would not touch it. I could be dead wrong, though. In 10 to 20 years, people may be flipping it for 2, 3 times, 4 times what they're paying now. It is what it is. So that's one thing that I do like about American Pickers, how they focus on their inventory and how they're able to look at certain items and go, you know what, it's going to take me 2 years to sell this, or this is a car, I have to restore it, I have to put all this money into it, I don't know if anything else is going to go wrong, and it may not be worth the risk. And they're absolutely right when they analyze business transactions from that perspective, okay? The other problem that I have with American Pickers, I'm going to go back to the negatives, all right? They now have 2 shops, okay? One's in Iowa, which is where they're from, no problem there. The other one is in Nashville, all right? A lot of these shops cater to tourists, sell a lot of souvenirs, themed merchandise, you know, shirts, hats, shot glasses, stuff of that nature, okay? That they make a lot of money off of. And that's nothing against them. We live in capitalism, guys. I have no problem with that. I'm just saying, though, you have to kind of take that into perspective that a lot of the people that are now starring on a lot of these reality TV shows, even Antiques Roadshow, okay? If you want to look up a name here, Leigh and Leslie Kino. The Kino brothers are very well known. They're rock stars of the antique world. they got their start going out, and they were actually born into more of an antique-oriented family. But they did get their start going out and just learning about antique furniture, items of that nature. And then because they're appraisers on Antiques Roadshow, they kind of hit rock star status. And I know it's kind of funny me sitting here saying rock star status when I'm talking about Antiques Roadshow. But they are probably the most popular appraisers of all time. They're brothers on the Antiques Roadshow series. They're Leigh and Leslie Kino, the Kino brothers. You can look it up. That said, a lot of these guys, like Rick Harrison on Pawn Stars, the Storage Wars, you know, you have Brandy, you have Daryl, all those guys, okay? All these guys have a celebrity status now because of the popularity of these shows. It's to the point where it's completely ridiculous. In fact, if you would even see these guys in public, most likely you would not be able to get close to them because people would be coming up asking for autographs and everything. I mean, it's kind of stupid when you think about it, how there's now celebrities in the antique and collectibles world all because they starred on a reality-based television show, all right? Because I think one of the things that the American public does wrong, it assumes because somebody is on a reality-based television show, and I want to caveat this with, I have nothing against Mike or Frank, I have nothing against the Harrisons, nothing against anybody that premieres on these shows, okay? But I think that people automatically assume they must know more than the other person that's involved in the antiques and collectibles trade who isn't starring, you know, in American Pickers or Pawn Stars or Storage Wars or isn't on Antiques Roadshow, when that's patently false. An expert, always remember this, even me, okay, even me, an expert is somebody who knows more and more about less and less. And I fall into that category too. My niche, I hate to say this as much as I wish it wasn't true, one of the things that I carry around with me like a cross to this very day, well, that's the pop culture expert guy. When really, I know art, I know coins, I know currency, I know historical documents, I know books, I know Tiffany glass, I know bottles, I know porcelain, I know pottery, I know traditional antiques, I know furniture, I know vintage advertising, I know all these categories, but because most of my articles, when I write for Antiques and Auction News, are geared around pop culture collectibles, what do you think I get stuck with the moniker of? Well, that guy knows all about pop culture collectibles. It's not true, but I do know them, obviously, but you're kind of forgetting all the other categories that I'm also knowledgeable in. It's kind of like somebody who's very good at one thing but knows another. He gets known for being known for the other thing, but not the thing that he's really good at. That's what's always been weird for me. I just kind of always liked pop culture-based collectibles, and I knew the market very well because I would come across them a lot back in the early 1990s when I was starting out in the trade. I used to always come across like Atari, ColecoVision, and Television, vintage Star Wars figures, all that stuff at that particular time. And I just learned it and was able to absorb a lot of the knowledge. And that's what really propelled me to the next level. But if it wasn't for that, I got to say this, I would have never had the stamina or the money coming in to be able to learn Tiffany glass or artwork or collectible first edition books or vinyl records or whatever else. You see what I'm saying? But it's kind of sad because I think a lot of people, and I'm seeing this with the American Pickers as well, they kind of get pigeonholed. Like the American Pickers tends to go after stuff that they're passionate about. I get it. But they tend to be pigeonholed with vintage advertising, Harley Davidson, Indian, vintage motorcycles, classic cars. A lot of those items tends to be their specialty and forte. And even if you want to talk about like vintage and antique bicycles, stuff of that nature. And don't get me wrong, it's good to know those markets, but some of those markets are very esoteric, and I'm talking specifically about antique and vintage bicycles. That's something that collecting category is kind of, I don't want to say dying out or going extinct, but let's be honest, how many people do you know are collecting vintage bicycles or even antique bicycles? Now, yeah, you get some people that are collecting Schwinn, stuff from the 60s, maybe the 70s, 50s, that coveted era there. But it's not going strong as it is today as it was back in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. That market has subsidized a little bit. Okay? So you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. Another thing I don't like about American Pickers is, I'm going to state two things: the values they place on items, and how if they have an item that has to be appraised, they still sometimes will put a value on it before it's even appraised. That just doesn't sit too well with me. Again, American Pickers is also one of those shows where I have an expert on demand. Okay, sometimes they'll be at somebody's house and they'll call up a gun expert or text somebody and he'll reply right away. That's really not realistic. We all have responsibilities. If you text me and you need an appraisal on the spot, it's probably not going to happen. If I'm shooting this video and a text comes through my cell phone, I'm not going to shut the video off and answer the text and go, oh, sorry guys, I had to respond to this to give somebody some advice who's out in the field trying to buy something that they're going to flip for a profit. It just doesn't work that way. And that's my problem with American Pickers and Pawn Stars. They make it seem like it's the buyer's problem, or how do I want to say this, responsibility to know what you're selling. If I knock on your door and you have a vintage Coke sign for sale, it is your job to know everything about that sign if you want to sell it to me. Okay? It's my job as a buyer to be able to authenticate it, value it, appraise it, and ensure it is definitely authentic. It's not my job to offer you fair price for it. It's my job to offer you a value that I think is fair to me for that item. Now again, going back to my Pawn Stars video, if you come to me and you want it appraised, that's a whole other ethical dilemma. If you come to me and ask for an appraisal, I cannot ethically offer to buy the item from you at that point. Okay? Some people disagree with this statement. I'm telling you, from an ethical standpoint, if somebody comes to you and they bring you something and you are an appraiser in the antiques and collectibles trade, as well as a dealer, an investor, whatever, you cannot offer to buy the item you are appraising. It is against ethics. It's against morality. It is not fair to the person who trusted you with valuing the item. That's why even when I go to flea markets, and I really don't go anymore, guys, I'm going to be very honest. I've said this before, there's not much at flea markets anymore that I see a benefit to me putting myself out there. Okay? But when I used to go to flea markets, somebody go, what do you think the value of this is? And I would tell them, well, do you really want me to answer that question? Because I'm looking to buy this particular item. That's how I would get around that. And I am ethical in that sense to this very day. You have to be in that sense. Nobody wants to come to you and they go, I want an appraisal on this. What will you give me for it? You can't answer both questions honestly. You either have a vested interest in buying the item to flip or for your own possession, or you have a vested interest in providing the person that's coming to you with knowledge and a fair appraisal based on current market value. It's one or the other. It cannot be both. It's a conflict of interest. The final point I want to make on American Pickers is they kind of seem to be fixated, and I brought this up a little earlier, on certain markets. And I've said this, vintage advertising, Harley Davidson, Indian motorcycle parts. The problem with that is if you're expensing trips throughout the whole entire U.S., you really cannot afford to specialize in only such markets. You know, I like the YouTube show, and I'm going to say this because I know it's a crossover with some of my audience. You guys ever watch Game Chasers? I like Game Chasers, okay? I have nothing against anything that they do. No commentary on them personally. I've never met them. But I do like the show for some of its entertainment value and what they come across. But at the same token, in all reality, you would never ever be able to survive if you even went just in a 50-mile radius and all you looked for was video games. It would not work. It would never ever yield any type of profit that you could sustain yourself on. You have to know other segments of the market and be, dare I say, an expert in those segments. If you are going to get into the retail or retail arbitrage or even the secondary market end of the antiques and collectibles trade, a mistake that a lot of beginning sellers and or speculators make is they only go after the stuff they have a passion for. And I often say, you need to eliminate passion for any type of business venture involved in the antiques and collectibles trade. So why are you only going after stuff that you have a passion for? Go after stuff, okay, that you don't have a passion for, that you may not know if you like it. For instance, I am not into sports. I'm athletic, I play sports, I work out, but I have no, how do I want to say this? I have no interest in spending a Sunday watching football or watching baseball or going to a sporting event. It's just not me. So I one time wanted to learn sports memorabilia, which I do know some of the market for that. I am not well versed in it because I can't get into it. You see what I mean? Had I have not tried though, I wouldn't have known. Whereas coins and currency, when I first started researching coins and currency at a young age, I was like, you know, part of this is really boring and part of it fascinates me. Well, it just turns out, as I got further and further into researching these items, I said, my gosh, I do have a passion for these items. And that blew in to me being able to invest, collect, and become very knowledgeable in those markets. I'm really into history. I love history. And coins and currency really tap in to the history of the United States, to the history of the monetary system, which is something I'm really interested in, being educated in finance, of course. That's something that I'm passionate about. So coins and currency really hit the mark. It's just like video games. I grew up, I could tell you stories from being 12 years old when I got my original Nintendo. I remember when I was 5 getting my first Atari. I remember my Apple IIc. My parents bought me an Apple IIc when I was in 6th grade, 5th grade, and it was really a life-changing event for me because I remember playing The Bard's Tale 2 and The Bard's Tale 3 on that freaking computer for hours on end, and I thought life could not get any better. I loved the Bard's Tales games so much. The one thing that I miss, I wish that somebody would do an accurate update to those 3 games, Bard's Tale 1, 2, and 3, for the Apple IIc. I know they were available for the Commodore and Atari and IBM, whatever. I had them on the Apple IIc and I loved them. Played them to death. Never beat one of them. It was too involved. But I used to love getting lost in some of the dungeons and fighting some of the monsters and dragons and characters. It was all consuming as a child. So that's something that shaped my interest in vintage video games, computers, stuff of that nature as well. We all have a catalyst, there's that word again, that brings us into the trade. You know, there's a lot of people that probably watch this video and have no interest in some of the more esoteric or even higher end antiques and collectibles that I show on this channel, whether it be Tiffany glass, coins, currency, whatever it is. I get that. But you can all learn something from other collectors, other investors in the trade. That's what I'm trying to do on this channel. So I thank you for watching. If you like my content, please consider subscribing. Please leave me a comment, and please like the video if you do like it. If I'm doing something that isn't resonating with you, please let me know. You can do that by leaving a comment. I'm not going to get mad if you leave me a negative comment if it's well constructed, okay, to the point where I can get something out of it and learn from it going forward. I thank you guys, and again, future topics that are coming, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon. We're going to go back and talk about a lot of great games again. We need a refresher on that. And we're going to be doing a video on Toy Hunter as promised. And also we're going to go back and visit antiques and collectibles as a valid alternative asset class. If you are not subscribed, please consider subscribing. And I really thank those of you that watch and view my content and are liking what you see. Thanks, guys.